The man behind the roaring sun was just beginning to rise over a quiet California town. It painted the rooftops orange and gold as small businesses opened their shutters, and groggy workers reached for their first cup of coffee. One of the oldest buildings on the block was a narrow auto shop called Ridge Street Motors. Its sign was faded, its windows dusty, and its owner was a man named Rick. Rick had grease-stained hands, a short temper, and a chip on his shoulder the size of a broken engine block. He worked fast, cursed often, and charged more than he should. Nobody liked him much, but everyone came to him because he was the only mechanic in town who could fix a vintage bike without ruining it. On that particular morning, Rick was already irritated. He had just gotten off the phone with a supplier who refused to deliver a part on time. His apprentice was late again, and worst of all, someone had parked a motorcycle right outside his garage door. Sleek, polished, and clearly expensive, the bike looked completely out of place among the rusted trucks and dented sedans that usually rolled through his shop. Rick walked up to it, scowling. What kind of idiot parks a machine like this here? He muttered. He bent down to inspect the details. Black frame, custom exhaust, polished leather seat, a small arch logo on the tank. He didn't recognize the model, which only made him angrier. Without thinking, Rick gave the bike a hard kick. The machine tipped over with a slow metallic groan and crashed onto its side. At that exact moment, a man stepped out of the coffee shop across the street, carrying a paper bag and a black helmet under his arm. He saw the bike on the ground. Then he saw Rick. Rick looked up, unbothered. "You parked that thing," he barked. The man didn't answer. He walked over calmly, set his bag down, and knelt beside the bike with quiet care. He checked the mirrors, the handlebars, and the side panel. He stood the bike up without a word. Rick snorted. "You shouldn't leave expensive toys lying around." The man finally spoke. His voice was low and calm. "You shouldn't damage what isn't yours." Rick raised his chin. What are you gonna do about it, tough guy?" The man looked at him for a long moment. Then he smiled, not cruel, not smug, just quiet. "Nothing," he said. "Not yet." He got on the bike, started the engine, and rode off. Rick shook his head. Idiots with money. What he didn't realize, what he couldn't have known, was that the man he just mocked wasn't some arrogant stranger. It was Keanu Reeves. And that wasn't just any bike. It was a prototype. Hand-built. One of a kind. And Keanu hadn't brought it here by accident. Later that day, word began to spread. First through the cafe acute. Then the gas station. Then the town's only newspaper office. People said they saw Keanu Reeves in town. Rick didn't believe it. Keanu Reeves wouldn't be caught dead in this dump. He scoffed. But the rumors grew louder. Someone had taken a photo, blurry but unmistakable. Rick started to worry, not because he feared the man, but because he suddenly remembered how he had kicked over that bike, and the way the man had said, "Not yet." The next morning, a sleek black van pulled up in front of Ridge Street Motors. The van had no logo. The windows were tinted. Out stepped a man in a suit with a clipboard. Rick wiped his hands and stepped outside. "You lost?" he asked. The man shook his head. "Mr. Reeves sent me." Rick froze. "What for?" "Evaluation. Site inspection. Potential renovation." "Renovation of what?" The man looked around. "This property. He's considering investing in something big for the community. He said he wanted to start here." Rick's heart pounded. "Investing? In this?" he asked. The man smiled. "Maybe, or maybe just watching." He handed Rick a card with a number and got back into the van. Rick turned the card over in his hand. There was no name, no company, just a number, and one sentence: "Every action tells a story." Over the next few days, things began to shift. Rick noticed new people in town. A couple in business clothes walked by his shop with cameras. Someone with a sketchpad sat across the street, watching the garage and taking notes. Even the mayor came by once, nodding to himself as he looked around the corner of the building. Rick tried to ignore it, but the pressure built. Then one morning, a letter arrived. Hand-delivered. No return address. Just his name, Rick. He opened it. Inside was a simple message. "We remember everything. The question is, do you?" Rick didn't sleep that night. He thought about every customer he had cursed at. Every overcharged invoice. Every time he laughed when someone couldn't afford repairs. And the bike, that beautiful machine, he hadn't just kicked it. He had kicked away something more valuable than he could understand. The next day, Rick walked into the center of town. He stood outside the small community art center, a place he had never visited. Inside, a young woman greeted him. "Can I help you?" Rick swallowed hard. "I'm looking for someone named Keanu." She blinked. "He's not here." But he was. Rick nodded slowly. He turned to leave, but on the wall behind her, he saw something that stopped him cold. A painting of his garage, but it was empty. No cars. No people, just rust. And the words underneath, "What you build can vanish." Rick walked out into the sunlight, suddenly unsure of the ground beneath his feet. What he didn't know, what no one knew yet, was that this was just the beginning. Keanu had plans, and Rick's past was about to catch up with him in ways he never imagined. The cracks begin to show. It had been for days since Rick received the strange letter, the one with no sender, just the words, "We remember everything." The question is, do you? He hadn't told anyone, not his apprentice, not the waitress he flirted with on slow afternoons, not even his dog, Rusty, who usually sat by his feet chewing on old rags while he worked. Rick was a man used to control, used to shouting louder than the problem and walking away before it caught up. But now, something had shifted. There was a quiet ticking in the air, like a clock he couldn't see. And every tick reminded him of that calm voice, "You shouldn't damage what isn't yours." Across town, things were changing. The mayor's office announced a new development project. Rumors swirled about an outreach center, possibly even a tech facility. Nobody knew the full story, but one name kept coming up: Keanu Reeves. Business owners whispered in cafes, "He's buying property, or donating, or both." Rick laughed the first time he heard it, but when he got home that night, his laughter faded into silence. A week later, two city officials visited Ridge Street Motors. Rick was under a car, trying to replace a rusted exhaust pipe. They knocked twice, then entered with clipboards and polite smiles. "Sir, we're conducting a survey of commercial buildings in the area," said the woman. "We'll just be a few minutes." Rick slid out from under the car, squinting. "What kind of survey?" he asked. "Standard." The man replied, "We're assessing structural conditions and historical significance. It's part of a new community grant program. You might be eligible." Rick frowned. Eligible for what? Renovation, restoration, or removal? That last word hit him like a hammer. Removal. They both nodded. Rick folded his arms, grease smearing across his coveralls. "You're saying this place could be shut down? Only if it doesn't meet code, or if it no longer serves the community." Rick scoffed. "I've served this community for 20 years. The woman looked up from her clipboard. "And how many thank you notes have you gotten?" Rick didn't answer. They finished their inspection and left a pamphlet. On the back was a quote, "Legacy is what they remember when you're gone." Rick crushed it in his fist. That night, he drank 2 beers and sat alone in his office. Photos of the shop from better days hung on the wall. Rick with his father, both covered in grease, smiling beside a beat-up Chevy truck. Back when the shop still had soul. Before pride turned to bitterness. Before money made him hard. He opened a drawer and pulled out a dusty envelope. Inside were unpaid bills, old complaints, and one torn letter from a customer he had overcharged. She had written, "I trusted you, and you made me feel small." Rick stared at the words for a long time. The next morning, Rick woke up to find someone had placed something at his garage door. It was a toolbox. Old. Familiar. His father's. It had gone missing years ago after the old man died. Rick dropped to his knees. There was a note inside. "This fixed more than engines. Maybe it still can." No signature. But the meaning was clear. Keanu. Rick didn't tell anyone. Instead, he cleaned the garage for the first time in months. He threw out broken parts, organized the tools, and even swept the corners where spiderwebs had made homes. Rusty barked happily at the sudden energy. Customers began to notice. "Shop looks different," one man said. Rick nodded. "Just trying something." He stopped charging extra for small parts. He started explaining repairs instead. Of just grunting. He apologized twice in one day. It felt strange. But also right. Still, the town buzzed. Keanu was spotted again, this time helping an old man change a flat tire near the school. Someone tried to record it, but he politely asked them not to. Not everything needs to be filmed, he said. Rick saw the clip anyway. He watched it 5 times, and something inside him softened. One evening, Rick found a new painting on the wall of the community art center. It showed 2 men standing beside a motorcycle. One was kneeling, the other just watching. Above them were the words, "Some mistakes are heavy, but they can be lifted." Rick stared at it for a long time. Then he left a note beneath it. "I'm trying, but the past does not let go so easily." The next day, Rick received a letter from the city. His garage was officially under review. Not just for repairs, but for community value. He had 30 days to prove he mattered. 30 days to show the town and himself that he was more than the man who kicked a stranger's bike. He didn't know if it would be enough, but for the first time in years, he was willing to try. The 30-day. Silence letter sat on Rick's desk like a brick. 30 days. 30 days to prove that Ridge Street Motors was worth keeping, not just structurally, but emotionally. It wasn't just a review of permits and fire exits anymore. It was a question of purpose, a judgment on the man who ran the place. Rick, who had once been proud of every bolt he tightened, now sat in silence wondering if he had built anything that could last. Word got around fast. Rick didn't say much, but the town whispered behind coffee cups and fuel pumps. "He's getting shut down, you know. Heard it's part of that new Keanu thing. Can't say I'll miss his attitude. Maybe it's time someone else took over." But something surprising happened. People started showing up. Not with complaints, but with stories. Mrs. Castro came in with her rusted minivan. She was a school bus driver and single mother of 3. Her brakes had been squeaking for months. Rick looked under the hood, then said, "I'll fix it. Free of charge." She blinked. Why? He didn't have a fancy answer. Just a simple one. "Because I should have done better a long time ago," she cried in the parking lot. The next day, a teenager named Eli wheeled his broken scooter into the shop. He didn't say much, just looked down at his shoes. Rick nodded to him. "Give me an hour." When he handed it back, working like new, Eli whispered, "My dad used to bring me here." Before he passed, Rick's heart sank. "I remember him. He drove that old Chevelle." Eli smiled. "You yelled at him once for smoking in the shop." Rick chuckled. "Yeah, I yelled at everyone back then. He liked you anyway." Day by day, the garage changed. Rick put up a chalkboard that said, "Pay what you can." People thought it was a joke. It wasn't. He stopped barking at customers. He started listening. He opened early and stayed late. He even turned one of the back rooms into a small waiting area with free coffee and an old radio, playing quiet blues. Then, something strange happened. A letter arrived. This time, it wasn't from the city. It was from a stranger. Handwritten. No name. No return address. Just words. "People see you now. Not because you speak, but because you listen." Rick stared at it for a long time. He didn't smile, but he breathed easier. On day 12, a reporter came by. A local one, from the town newspaper. She asked for an interview. Rick hesitated. But agreed. They sat outside the shop, sun falling between them. "Why the change?" she asked. Rick looked down at his hands. Grease under the nails. Cuts healing. "Because I forgot what this place was supposed to be." And what was that? A place where things get fixed, not just engines. She wrote that down. Then she asked, "Is it true you had a run-in with Keanu Reeves?" Rick paused. Double quotes. "Yeah, I did." "What happened?" Rick looked out toward the street. A father and son were walking past, pointing at the sign. "I broke something, and he didn't break me back." The reporter was quiet. Rick added, "That kind of silence teaches more than shouting ever could." By day 15, the kindness spread. A bakery down the street started giving free muffins to anyone who said they came from Ridge Street Motors. The library put up a board that said, "People who fix things matter. We see you." And a local artist, an old man with shaky hands, painted a mural on the side of the garage. It showed a man bent over an engine, but instead of metal parts, he was fixing broken hearts. puzzle pieces, and forgotten dreams. Below it were the words, "Tools can fix more than machines." Rick stood in front of the mural for a long time. He didn't speak. He just nodded. On day 20, a black car pulled up. Not flashy, not loud. It parked across the street, and out stepped Keanu Reeves. Rick saw him from the garage. Their eyes met. No anger. No fear. Just understanding. Keanu walked over slowly. Rick wiped his hands and stepped outside. "Wasn't expecting you," he said. "Didn't think I'd be back," Keanu replied. They stood in silence. Then Rick spoke first. "I was wrong." Keanu looked around. "I see that you changed. I'm trying." "You didn't shout. You didn't defend yourself." "I used to think silence was weakness," Rick said. "But it turns out, it makes people see clearer." Keanu nodded. Double quotes. "So, what now?" Rick asked. Keanu smiled. "Now, you keep going." He handed Rick a folded letter and walked back to his car. Rick opened the letter after he left. Inside was a single line. "The garage is yours, for as long as your heart is in it. No signature. No logo. Just kindness." Rick sat on the steps of his garage as the sun dipped behind the hills. The mural glowed in the fading light. He looked around. Tools, grease, warmth, people. And for the first time in years, he felt whole. The engine of Memrith days after Keanu's visit moved slower. Rick didn't rush anymore. He used a bolt from one repair to the next, like the world would fall apart if he didn't tighten every screw in record time. Now, he moved with calm purpose. He spoke with care. And for the first time in years, customers left smiling instead of muttering under their breath. But the town hadn't forgotten everything. Some people still rolled their eyes when they saw the mural. "Rick's just trying to impress Keanu," they said. "Too late for him to change," others whispered. And some just didn't believe it at all. But Rick kept showing up. Kept fixing what was broken. One morning, Rick found an old man waiting by the garage before opening hours. He wore a faded jacket and leaned heavily on a cane. "You're early," Rick said. "You're late." The man replied with a grin. Rick chuckled and opened the shop. The man introduced himself as Roy. He had served in the army, then spent 30 years as a janitor at the local school. Now he lived alone, his hands too shaky to fix his own truck. "I used to come here," Roy said. "Back when your dad ran it." Rick paused. "You knew him?" "He changed my starter on a Sunday afternoon," Roy said. "Didn't charge me a dime. Told me I'd paid enough in life." Rick swallowed hard. "You're his boy?" Roy said, looking Rick in the eyes. "But you forgot him for a while." Rick nodded slowly. "I did." "Well," Roy said, patting the truck's hood, "maybe it's time to remember." After fixing Roy's truck, Rick went through a stack of old boxes in the back room. He hadn't touched them in years. Dusty photo albums, yellowed invoices, tools wrapped in cloth. In one box, he found a small notebook, his father's. Inside were handwritten notes. "Mrs. Daniels gave her new tires. She lost her husband last year. No charge. Coach Ramirez fixed radiator. Told him to pay me in baseball tickets. Fair deal." Rick flipped page after page. His father hadn't just run a business. He had taken care of people. Rick spent that night writing. Not bills. Not parts lists. Letters. He wrote to families he had overcharged. To customers he'd yelled at. He didn't make excuses. He just said, "I see it now, and I'm sorry." Some letters were dropped in mailboxes. Others were handed out in person. One woman read hers and hugged him without a word. Another tore it in half and walked away. Rick didn't blame her. Kindness, he had learned, isn't always accepted on the first try. On day 27, the mayor's office sent a final notice. An inspector would arrive on Friday to assess whether Ridge Street Motors had regained its value to the community. Rick didn't panic. He didn't pace. He simply cleaned the shop, oiled the tools, and sat outside watching the sunset with Rusty curled up at his feet. Friday morning arrived quietly. The inspector was a tall woman with silver glasses and a calm voice. She carried a tablet and asked questions that weren't about fire codes. "What changed in the last month?" she asked. Rick thought for a moment. "Me. Why?" "Because someone showed me what silence can do and what legacy really means." She nodded. then pointed to the mural on the wall. Who painted that? Old man named Charlie. Rick said, hands don't work like they used to, but his heart's still steady. And that quote? Rick smiled. His words. After the inspector left, the town waited. Rick didn't ask anyone for help. But help came anyway. Roy returned with a sign he made by hand that read, honest work done here. A local baker brought muffins again. A teenage girl dropped off a thank you card that read, you made my brother feel like someone. That night, Rick sat on the curb outside the garage, watching the stars. A car pulled up. Not flashy. But familiar. Keanu stepped out, wearing a plain black jacket, carrying nothing. He sat beside Rick in silence. After a long while, he spoke. You fixed more than machines. Rick nodded. I just wish my dad had seen it. Keanu looked up at the stars. He sees it. They sat like that for a while, two men under a quiet sky, surrounded by grease, gravel, and grace. Then Keanu stood. One more thing, he said, handing Rick a small envelope. Rick opened it after Keanu left. Inside was a note. We all fall. The miracle is getting back up different. And taped to the back of the note was the original blueprint for the arch prototype Keanu had written. Signed. Dated. And now, Rick's, the town never found out exactly what happened behind closed doors. They didn't know about the letters, or the toolbox, or the father's notebook. But they saw something better. A man who had once been feared was now trusted. And a garage that once smelled like anger now smelled like hope. The blueprint and the boy. The next morning, Rick placed the blueprint Keanu had given him in a simple black frame. He didn't hang it in his office or hide it behind a locked drawer. He placed it on the front counter. Anyone who walked in could see it right between the coffee pot and the sign and clipboard. Below it, he wrote a small note in blue marker. I kicked this, and he forgave me. That's where this story begins. Customers stopped to read it. Some smiled. Some looked confused. But one teenage boy wearing a faded hoodie and carrying a backpack covered in patches stood staring at it for almost 10 minutes. Rick noticed. You okay, kid? The boy turned slowly. Did you really mess up that bad? Rick nodded. Worse. And he just let it go. Rick leaned on the counter. Not at first. He gave me space to see it for myself. Then he showed me what to do with the guilt. The boy looked down at the blueprint again. I mess up. A lot. Rick nodded gently. That's not what defines you. What you do after, that's the real story. The boy smiled a little. Can I work here? He asked suddenly. Rick blinked. You fix cars? No, but I can learn. And I won't steal tools or cuss in front of old ladies. Rick chuckled. That's a solid start. He reached into the cabinet and pulled out a spare pair of gloves. What's your name? Ty. Rick tossed him the gloves. You start Monday. Over the next few days, Ty showed up early and stayed late. He swept the floors without being told, handed Rick tools before he even asked, listened more than he talked. But one evening, Rick caught him standing by the mural on the wall. His hand was resting on the painted image of the man fixing puzzle pieces and broken hearts. You okay? Rick asked. Ty shrugged. This place feels like something. Rick leaned against the wall beside him. That's because it is. My dad used to hit the wall when he got mad, Ty said. He never fixed anything, just broke stuff. Rick didn't say anything for a while. Then he replied, well, maybe this is where that ends. On day 29, Rick got the call. The inspector's report was in. He held the phone to his ear, eyes closed. The voice on the other end was warm. Mr. Rick, based on community feedback, site condition and cultural value, Ridge Street Motors has been approved for continued operation. Rick let out a shaky breath. Thank you. No, sir. Thank you. Later that day, the mayor's office hosted a small public gathering in the town square. It wasn't formal, no stage, just folding chairs and a table with lemonade. A city official handed Rick a certificate and shook his hand. People clapped. Some even cheered. But Rick didn't speak. Instead, he held up the certificate and pointed behind him. Ty stood quietly near the back, hands in his pockets. Rick motioned him forward. The crowd went still. Rick handed Ty the certificate. This belongs to all of us, he said. Ty blinked, speechless. A local news station filmed the moment. It aired on the evening news under The headline, From Wreckage to Redemption, the garage that changed a town. But Keanu didn't watch it on TV. He was already gone. Still, he left one final letter. Evelyn, the woman who ran the community art center, delivered it to Rick in person. He wanted me to wait until the review was over, she said. Rick opened the letter slowly. Inside was a single message. One day, someone will come here broken, and you'll know how to help them. That's the gift. Weeks passed. The shop was busier than ever. Rick was quieter, but happier. Ty became a permanent part of the garage. He still made mistakes, spilled oil once, stripped a bolt twice, but he always showed up. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, Ty sat beside Rick on the front steps. I Googled him, Ty said. Rick raised an eyebrow. Keanu, I didn't know who he was. I do now. Rick smiled. Does it change anything? Ty shook his head. Makes it better, actually. Rick nodded. Some people wear kindness like a mask. Others wear it like a second skin. He wore it real, Ty said. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Ty asked, so what now? Rick looked at the open road beyond the parking lot. Now we wait for the next broken thing and fix it. Rick nodded slowly, with grace. Across town, someone painted a new mural on a brick wall. This one showed a man lifting a motorcycle, with both hands, not out of rage, but to shield a child from the rain. Beneath it were the words, even anger can become shelter if we choose. No one signed it, but everyone knew who had inspired it. And Ridge Street Motors stood quietly beneath the sky, humming with the sound of wrenches, jazz music, and second chances. Asterisk, the legacy we leave. Months passed like pages turning. Ridge Street Motors became more than a repair shop. It became a place people went not just to fix their engines, but to breathe, to sit, to be heard. There were chairs outside, now old, mismatched ones donated by neighbors. A chalkboard with a quote that changed weekly. Sometimes it read, "Be the reason someone gets back up." Other times, noise doesn't prove strength, kindness does. Ty had grown into the job. He had a new pair of gloves now gifted to him by Rick, stitched with his name. His hands moved confidently over gears, wires, and rusted parts. But more importantly, he greeted every customer by name, learned their stories, and fixed more than just what was broken under the hood. On a cool Friday morning, a woman in her 60s pulled into the shop in a silent electric car. Rick walked out to greet her. Need a charge or a checkup? He asked. She smiled, holding out a small box. Neither. I just came to return something. Rick opened it slowly. Inside was the same chain his father used to wear around his neck, stamped with his initials. Where did you find this? He whispered. He gave it to my husband years ago. Said it belonged with someone who still believed in fixing the world. My husband passed last spring. I think it's time it came home. Rick stood quietly, tears rising. He held the chain in both hands and nodded. Thank you. Later that evening, Rick placed the chain inside a small glass frame, hanging it beside the blueprint Keanu had once given him. Above both items, he pinned a hand-painted sign. The weight of mistakes can build bridges if we carry them with care. But the story didn't end there. One day, as the sun rose golden over the hills, a motorcycle pulled into the shop. Sleek, black, familiar. Keanu Reeves stepped off, helmet in hand. Eyes calm as ever, Rick stepped outside, wiping grease from his hands. They didn't speak right away. They just nodded. Keanu looked around at the chalkboard, the mural, the chairs, and Ty, who was showing a little boy how to tighten a bolt. You built something, Keanu finally said. I broke something first, Rick replied. That's usually how the best stories start. Keanu reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. You gave me a message once, he said. Now I'm giving one back. Rick unfolded the paper. It was a sketch of a garage, but this one had a giant heart painted on the roof. People stood around it, old and young, laughing, crying, fixing, learning. In the center was a small sign that read, Open, always. Rick looked up. You drew this? Keanu smiled. Not me, a kid from another town. I told him your story. Rick blinked. Why? Because I thought he needed hope. Turns out, he needed a blueprint. They sat together on the steps, just like before. Rick broke the silence. You know, I still think about that day, the day you kicked my bike. Yeah, Keanu chuckled. I think about it too. You could have crushed me. With words, with power, with everything. But then you'd be crushed, not changed. Rick looked down. Why did you come back? To see the ending, Rick smiled softly. This doesn't feel like an ending. No, Keanu said. It feels like a beginning. Before he left, Keanu walked over to Ty. You good? He asked. Ty nodded. Better than I've ever been. Keanu looked him in the eye. Keep fixing. Even what people think can't be fixed. Ty smiled. Yes, sir. And with that, Keanu rode off again quietly, without fanfare. His bike humming like a song that never needed words. The seasons turned. The mural outside faded a little from the sun. But the garage never stopped beating. People came from neighboring towns just to sit on the old chairs and talk to Rick. Ty started teaching weekend classes to kids who wanted to learn tools instead of tablets. And every year, on the day Keanu first arrived, Rick gave out free oil changes to anyone with a story. He called it the day of second chances. Years later, long after the paint on the wall had cracked and the blueprint had yellowed behind its glass, a stranger stood outside Ridge Street Motors. He asked an old woman walking by, "Is this really the place?" She nodded. Where the man kicked the bike? Yes, and where he learned how to stand again. And if you ever visit Ridge Street Motors, you'll see a sign out front. It doesn't say auto repair or mechanic on duty. It just says, we fix more than engines. And inside, if you sit long enough, you might hear stories of a man who broke something and of a silence that saved him.